This is OwlUp, where learning happens in minutes, not hours. For a deeper journey, explore all our courses at owlup.co. Now, let's dive in. Chapter 1 of How Immigration Actually Works: Policy, People, and Economics, the Foundations of Immigration Systems. In this chapter, you'll learn: identify the basic principles of immigration systems. Let's dive in. About 1 in 30 people alive today live outside the country where they were born. Yet for most of human history, borders were barely policed lines on a map. A young nurse, a tech worker, and a war survivor may all move, but they're stepping into 3 very different rulebooks. In most countries, the front door of immigration policy is built on 3 pillars that don't always sit comfortably together: picking who gets in, protecting who's already inside, and deciding what happens after arrival. Different governments weight those pillars differently. Some, like Canada, pour concrete under economic selection with detailed scoring systems. Others, like Germany or Sweden, reinforce protection and family first, then retrofit labor rules around them. And in the Gulf, short-term labor demand dominates while long-term settlement is almost structurally excluded. These design choices didn't appear overnight. They're the result of wars that redrew maps, empires that collapsed, and markets that began treating skills like tradable assets. The tension is constant. Make entry easier to meet real needs, or tighten screws to calm fears. Every system is a moving compromise. A useful way to see today's systems is as layered, not linear. On paper, countries publish clean categories: worker, student, spouse, refugee. In practice, those lanes blur. A student becomes a worker marries a citizen, a refugee retrains in a shortage occupation. Each shift triggers a different bureaucratic algorithm, often designed by separate ministries that don't fully coordinate. Over time, these layers harden like geological strata. Each reform leaves traces, exemptions, and loopholes that future reforms must either tunnel through or carefully build around. A good way to see the foundations is to strip away the legal labels and ask 3 blunt questions every system must answer. 1. Who do we want? 2. Who do we have to accept? 3. Who do we feel responsible for once they arrive? Different models start from different questions, but they're all wrestling with that trio. Who we want drives the economic channels. Here, states decide which skills, ages, and experiences are in demand, and then try to write those preferences into law. Canada's points grid, the EU's salary thresholds, or employer sponsorship in the US and Gulf are all variations on this, translating political and business priorities into checkboxes and minimums. In practice, the criteria lag reality. Shortages change faster than legislation, so you get periodic priority lists, emergency visas, and one-off pilot programs layered on top of the core rules. Who we have to accept covers obligations that governments can't easily walk away from. Refugees under international conventions, people with strong constitutional rights to enter, often citizens and some family members, and, in free movement zones, other member state nationals. This is where sovereignty is most constrained. A war or economic crisis abroad can suddenly swell these flows, forcing rapid improvisation. Temporary protections, ad hoc camps, or fast-track processing, built on top of slower peacetime procedures. Who we feel responsible for is the integration side: language classes, credential recognition, anti-discrimination rules, paths to permanent status or citizenship. These are political choices about membership, not just border control. Gulf states, for example, outsource much of belonging to employers and rarely convert long stays into citizenship, while traditional settlement countries treat some newcomers as future voters from day one. The surprising part is how interdependent these tracks are. Tight family rules can push people into asylum channels. Stingy integration support can fuel public backlash that later shrinks labor programs. Policymakers often adjust one lever and discover, years later, that another part of the system quietly absorbed the pressure. The result isn't a neat machine, but something closer to a living ecosystem. You can't touch one species of visa or status without changing the habitat for the others. Think of countries managing migration a bit like investors managing a portfolio. They rarely bet everything on a single asset. Canada might overweight skilled workers but still hold family and refugee shares. The US keeps a dominant position in family links, with smaller but politically noisy allocations to employment and humanitarian routes. The EU layers free movement rights on top, creating a kind of low-friction intra-portfolio transfer when a worker moves from Spain to Germany without starting from zero. Concrete examples show how this plays out. When Lebanon's labor market buckled under the arrival of Syrians, international agencies funded work permit schemes so refugees could move from pure humanitarian support toward taxed employment, softening domestic resentment. During COVID-19, several European states quietly extended or reissued seasonal farm permits because crops were rotting in fields, demonstrating how economic and humanitarian instincts can briefly align when food security is at stake. And in the Gulf, recent experiments with longer visas and limited mobility between employers hint at tentative diversification after decades of extreme concentration. Roughly 3.6% of humanity now lives abroad, yet future flows may hinge less on choice than on necessity. As coastlines erode and heat redraws farm maps, people will move the way rivers seek lower ground, following viable jobs, water, and safety. Systems built around past wars and aging now face climate shocks, AI-driven screening, and deep fakes. The real test will be whether public trust can stretch fast enough to cover new categories of movers. As automation and climate shifts reshape where work and safety exist, tomorrow's movers may look less like job seekers and more like storm chasers following habitable ground. Systems that once reacted slowly will need to flex like suspension bridges, bending to sudden shocks while still carrying the weight of public consent and basic fairness. Before next week, ask yourself, 1. If I mapped my life like an immigration system, what eligibility criteria, values, boundaries, or non-negotiables am I actually using to decide who and what gets access to my time and energy, and which of those would I tighten or relax today? 2. Where in my life do I have a backlog or visa overstay, commitments, habits, or relationships that I keep renewing by default, and what is one concrete policy change I'm ready to implement? For example, ending a recurring obligation, redefining a role, or setting a clear limit this week. 3. If I designed an onboarding process for new opportunities like jobs, projects, or people, what specific questions would they have to pass? For example, does this align with my long-term goals? Does it respect my capacity? Before I stamp them with an internal approved. This was OwlUp, your daily step forward. To keep learning with structured courses and more insights, go to owlup.co. Until tomorrow.